If the Haredim are 10% of the population, what is the basis of their political power?
As many people know, Israel has a democracy that is quite different in structure than ours. Israel's political system is based on coalitional party sharing, because no party in the history of Israel's politics has ever won a majority vote. The Knesset is 120 members. You have to have 61 in order to rule, and no party, even at Labor's height, has ever been able to get a majority. So both the left and the right, thank you. Hello? Both the left and the right are dependent, as they have been since the first days of Ben Gurion, on the inclusion of a religious party. It's coalitional politics.
Over here? Just give. Oh. I'll give it back to you. Thank you. David Begelfer. Question regarding Egypt. It's always wonderful to see, a revolution, especially, inspired by youth and such. But the reality starts to come when you show the number of people in poverty. The expectations for so many of these people are going to be overnight. We're going to have money, we're going to have jobs, life is going to change. Reality is certainly far from that. You look at the uneducated and such like that. I guess part two of that question, instead of like, what do you think about that, is obviously that's going to leave somewhat of a void there for who's going to be able to step forward. The one party that seems to be, but that's not a party, but the one group that seems to be so well organized versus everyone else who really isn't organized at all because of the history, of course, is the Muslim Brotherhood. So where do you think that is going to be going?
On the first part, is this okay? Yeah. On the first part, which I've already forgotten, because I'm focusing on the second part, the expectation, thank you. I do think there's one thing about Egyptians, and this is why I think it's important for all of us to do what we are doing here tonight, and what we should not just listen to other people when they make these broad sweeping generalizations. Is like, Egypt isn't Libya, even though it's right next door. It's certainly not Israel, though it's not next door. It's not even Jordan, or it's not Saudi Arabia. So country by country, we just have to do this. We have to figure out the history, the culture, the politics that are distinct to these particular places. And Egypt prides itself on its 7,000 years of civilization. They pride themselves on taking a long time to do whatever they want to do. So as you all know about the Egypt time, perhaps, or they have a thing about, you all know the concept of mañana, right, in Mexico, and the Egyptians have a concept of, bukra, and bukra is basically like mañana, but without the urgency. And I do believe that the culture of Egypt understands that this is not going to happen overnight. What we keep hearing from, all different walks of life, from our own youthful children who are Egyptian, to our friends who are middle-aged and up, who are no friends of Mubarak, there is a deep desire for a return to stability with development and progress. So I think the Egyptians have this long view and have this sense that they understand that it's not going to happen overnight. At the same time, you have this, and I'll say it in the double entendre of the sense of the elite. The elite, even the young kids are the elite. I mean, they are running, they are pushing for continued reform and revolution. And then you have the political elite who actually are joining them, but the vast majority of Egyptians, as you indicate, are, they're concerned about bread and jobs and healthcare and education and things like that. So I do believe that there is this sense of, we'll wait, but we'll push. We don't expect that it'll improve overnight, but we want Mubarak on trial. We want his billions returned to the state. We want tourists to come back because we're so dependent upon, tourists to feed our economy, etc. We need stability and security, so we don't like the police, but we need the police back, etc. The second question about the Muslim Brotherhood is, that's one of the fundamental questions. That is the question. And what the Muslim Brotherhood has given mixed signals from the very beginning of this. During the revolution, they said, we won't take part. This is not our revolution. And they demanded that their people not go into the streets. And then they realized, oh, no, this is serious. Get into the streets. And then there was a sense of real cooperation between the Muslim Brotherhood and just the revolutionary group. This was a leaderless revolution. We don't have a Khomeini, either a boogeyman or a hero leader of this revolution. So the Muslim Brotherhood has been playing it beautifully because they can, as you point out. They're the only, and they are now a party, by the way. They don't call themselves the Muslim Brotherhood Party, they call themselves a Freedom and Democracy Party or something very similar to what the Islamist Turks call themselves. But they've been saying, no, we're not going to run a presidential candidate. But now the word is that someone who is a Muslim Brotherhood is running for president. They are not going to run more than the 51% of the seats in parliament because they don't want to scare everybody away. At the same time, you have a division within the Muslim Brotherhood. These guys are 70 years old and up, running an organization that's been around since 1928. I interviewed some of them about a month ago, and they said, look, again, we have this long view. We're in our 70s. We've fought for decades against Nasser, Sadat, Mubarak. We can fight a little more. We can wait a little more. We've fought in the sense of peaceful fighting since 1971, when we cut the deal with Anwar Sadat, who let us out of prison. So they do have the long view. They do have the organization, but they also have their intergenerational divides. There are 20-somethings and 30-something Muslim brothers who are campaigning against their own leadership. Like, well, we got rid of Mubarak, now we want to get rid of these 70-year-old guys, and we want to be the next one. At the same time, there's another Islamist trend coming down the pike, and this is I think this is one of the more exciting developments that I've seen in Egypt in many years. They're not as well organized as the Muslim Brothers, but they're former Muslim Brothers who are economically and socially and culturally liberal Islamists who put women in positions of authority, who bring in Coptic Christians into the mix, into the party. They want to run, and they're called Al-Wasat, the center. And they are very adamant against the Muslim Brotherhood. They say those guys are too religious, too conservative. Sorry, that's the word I was struggling for. Too conservative, no matter what their age, whether they're 20, 30, 40, or 70. And yes, 50s and 60-year-olds are also running in well. But the Wasat party is like the 30 and 40-year-old guys and some women who are distancing themselves. So I'll sum this up by saying what I love about what's happening in Egypt is you've got the scary boogeyman of the Muslim Brothers, which is not Khomeini-type people, but you also have enough divisions that I think as Egypt progresses toward a democracy, you will have these democratic elements. I don't know if it'll be like Israel, where you have a parliamentary system in which you will have like 5 people can make a government or not, or if it'll be more like the American system, winner take all. That we don't know yet. But I trust that Egyptians will continue to fight with one another, whether they're Islamist against Islamist, or Islamist against secular, or Christian against Christian, or Christian against Muslim. So that democratic sense, I think, is where we're going.
I actually want to ask a question, if I could. I'm intrigued, and this comes from pure naivete. But when we saw the photos, then the videos that Margaret put together, and when we see your statistics, which says 60% of the Egyptian population under the age of 25, and then very large 18 to 25-year-olds. And then I think back to the 1960s when the baby boom generation was coming of age. That was me and you. Even you. They were the ones in the streets. We were the ones who led the struggle against the Vietnam War, led the struggle for the civil rights movement. It wasn't 70-year-olds, it wasn't 60-year-olds, it was young people. To what extent was because of the demographics, this huge influx of young kids, which I presume also occurred in Tunisia, in Libya, in Bahrain, in Yemen, to what extent was this almost inevitable as a result of this boom in young people?
Thank you. I think the inevitability was certainly the frustration part. What we have been, it's funny because, for years we've been saying, I've been saying since 1979, Egypt isn't Iran. So we're not going to see what we actually have just seen this year, which is people taking to the streets like this. Because there's always been, I mentioned it ever so briefly, but it's a concept I've talked about for a couple decades, the social contract. This is why you have authoritarian regimes. You have a social contract. You stay out of politics, we'll provide for your basic needs. That fell apart decades ago. So finally, you've got this confluence of events, really. It's the youth bulge, it's Facebook, it's Twitter, but the revolution didn't happen, in a cloud. It happened on the street. So was it inevitable? I guess now I have to say, of course, but did I think so 6 months ago? No, I didn't think so 6 months ago. Now we look across, when Eastern Europe had this whatever second wave of democracy, everyone kept saying, watch, the Arab world is next. And it was, it's just like 20 years later, or even more. And that's, so I guess it's all inevitable at some point that there will be change and change and change. It's just, the question is the timing. Like our friend Mike Dukakis always loves to say, timing is everything.
Right. Larry, do you want to add anything to that?
My understanding of the Muslim Brotherhood is that they would love to see the peace treaty with Israel rescinded, ideally, but they've clearly acknowledged it's not in the cards, because that's not what the Egyptian people want. Sadat came to Jerusalem in 1978 for one obvious reason. He realized once and for all there was no military solution to the problem with Israel. There's no military solution. You can't defeat Israel militarily. So he had to figure out a different way, and he succeeded. My sense is, and this goes right back to Shimon Peres and his vision of the new Middle East that came out after the Oslo Accord, and which everybody now, today, mocks as being infantile fantasy. I think we have to go back to the vision of a new Middle East, the new common market of the Middle East, with Israel as the economic engine, the economic thrust. Instead of hating Israel, for heaven's sake, exploit what Israel has to offer a benighted part of the world, like the Arab world. You talk about 390 or 400 million people with 100 million people living on $2 a day. That's incomprehensible and despicable. Let Israel not become what is the word? Hegemony, the economic hegemonist, whatever the word might be. But try to imagine and idealize a partnership instead of a never-ending conflict.
A question? We're going to try this microphone. Let's see if it works.
Okay.
You have to hold it underneath you.
Just hold it under your chin. Yeah. There you go.
Julia Geisman. Larry, I have a question for you. You can hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes.
There you go.
I have been in Israel, and one of the things I was told when I was there was that the Hasidim, particularly the religious right, did not believe that Israel should be a state until the Messiah came. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it all depends what part of the ultra-Orthodox community you're talking about. There were certain elements that absolutely and categorically were anti-Zionist for religious and theological reasons, yeah.
So what percentage of the population do they represent?
I would say,
And
yeah.
one other, two other questions. along that line. What percentage do they represent? Are they represented in Knesset? And what's the implication for the future?
I don't have a statistic in front of me, but they represent a small percentage of the Israeli population, obviously. The Nudarai Karta, I mean, they're really Meshuggah people. I've met them. They supported Arafat. The head of the Nudarai Karta was Arafat's key Jewish advisor. I mean, really crazy stuff. Because theologically, it is blasphemy to declare Jewish sovereignty without divine initial intervention. That was the issue. Shas was the first ultra-Orthodox party to enter very seriously into the Israeli political system. And they're powerful. They can make or break a government. They now are very hawkish, even though their head was at one point Davish, Obadiah, Rabbi Obadiah. I'm concerned about the issue of land and the sacredness of land as an ultimate impediment to the peace process. That's my own personal worry. There it is. You're never going to be able to argue with somebody who is grounded and really immersed in a religious doctrine. There's no argument. That's the problem. You can argue with a secularist. You cannot argue with a person obsessed with theology.
Well, what you're really talking about is a clash of fundamentalism. It's fundamentalist Islamic.
It's not just in Israel. This is the problem we're facing all over the world.
No, I know. That's what
It's the conflict between those who are willing to compromise and those who are not, whether it's Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or anything else.
Over here.
Thanks. My name is Marcus Weiss, and in a related event for both of you, Barry's been taking us back to that nostalgia walk of the 60s, and long before we were marching on Washington and then celebrating in Woodstock, some of us went to an ultra-Orthodox seminary, and the elite scholars there felt the same way. No Israel except like a delicatessen trip once for cultural purposes and not more. Yet my last trip to Israel a decade ago, I found the equivalent of Nobel laureates, the scholars from those great religious institutions in Baltimore and Cleveland that were extremely Orthodox, not only had emigrated and done Aliyah, but they were very aggressively immersing themselves in the Knesset, in the politics. They were brilliant strategists, and these were the sort of intellectual baseball card collecting type rabbis. And I would imagine in both cultures, that I'm curious both of your takes on what's happening with the role of these great intellectual scholars that are admired throughout both societies, and why are we seeing in Israel all of a sudden they're slipping in like CIA specialists, which is what I was listening to and observing, and I was really surprised to see revered scholars who never would have thought of moving to Israel now very much being involved in Shas and Abu Dhabi politics.
What political stance do you perceive them taking, essentially?
Pro-Shas, pro-Abu Dhabi, very ultra-Orthodox, but these were brilliant strategists. I mean, really the top elite intellectuals.
So I can only assume that their attitude toward the land is one of sacredness. I can only assume that. Yeah. Yes, they're brilliant strategists. Look where they've come in just a relatively few decades to the absolute delineator of who's going to sustain power in the Knesset. I think that Netanyahu is far more a politician than he is an idealist. He wants to hold his government together, and I don't think he's going to really compromise. And I don't know where the compromise is going to come from. That's the problem. It's not going to come from the current government, and it's not going to come from the Arabs. I don't see it.
Denis?
On the Egypt front, what we witnessed during the heyday of the revolutionary fervor of Egypt is two Nobel Prize laureates. The one I mentioned, Baradei, And the other, Ahmed Zuhail, who is here in Boston, I think. Right? He's based, where is he based?
California.
California. He's physics.
Chemistry.
Chemistry. Okay. So we had these two intellectuals, Nobel Prize winners, coming back saying, "Let's reform the political system." That's not a big number, first of all, but they are both very prominent. Zuhail has actually got deeper roots. I mean, they're both Egyptian. They both grew up there. They both emigrated. But Zuhail has been coming back on long enough that he has more resonance among Egyptians, because of his residence, as opposed to Baradei, who kind of left for 20, 30 years, swept in, swept out, swept in, and wanted to change. But my point is that you've got these two great intellectual and global intellectual activists, but we don't have, unfortunately, Egyptians have had to leave the country because of the authoritarian nature that they lived under for decades. They couldn't be as prominent within Egypt. Anybody who ever got to be more popular than the president, for instance, had problems. And Amr Musa, who is a candidate for president now, is one of the prime examples. He came to prominence in the 1990s, and he was so prominent that there was even a song about him. And that was the point where Mubarak said, he's too popular. He took him away from being foreign minister of Egypt and made him the head of the Arab League. So it was sort of a demotion, but by parallel, get him out of the Egyptian sphere and put him in the Arab sphere. But still, so they're just, you can't do that. I mean, maybe under a democratic system will allow for, the Egyptians are a very well educated, a very sophisticated, very strategic group of people. That's why the Arab world likes to import Egyptians, and whether it's day laborers or teachers in Jordan or in Saudi Arabia or in Libya, the Egyptians have been the labor force for the Arab world, whether it's the oil industry or the healthcare industry or the teaching industries, and they are a migrating people as well. So let's see if they can come back to roost and help improve the system.
Is Zweig going to run for the president?
Zweig can't.
He's married to a
Syrian.
Syrian.
The Egyptians came up with a rule that not only must you be born not in Kenya, you must be born in Egypt. You must have Egyptian parents, and you must have an Egyptian spouse. That's how limited you can. And you have to be over 40 or 45 years old. That's a given, right?
Over here.
So no, he won't be able to. But Baradei can.
My name is Grace Shepherd. As I understand it, Egypt was once an intellectual center for Islam in the medieval period, I believe. A quite rational, thoughtful, influential center. Very different from the one that we see at this time in Iran. Do you see any possibility of that tradition being revived? Are there the roots still there?
The point was that Egypt, especially in medieval times, was known to be really a global leader. We'll say, you didn't say this, but a leader for thoughtful, rational Islamic thinking, and again, part of the 7,000, and could it return to such a prominent role with both the rationality as well as the Islamic thinking? And I think, in short, the answer is yes. My answer would be yes, but it'll take a while because one, it is home to Al-Azhar University, which is over 1,000-year-old university. It is the seat of learning for Islamic, especially Sunni Islam. But they teach all branches of Islamic thought, the 4 different schools within Islamic thought, as well as Shia. You can come to Egypt and learn any aspect of Islam. And then you go back to Indonesia, or you go back to Iran, or you go back to Detroit, and you are a trained sheikh, and you can return. You are a scholar. So there's that, and the interesting thing about that is that Al-Azhar University was founded by the Shia, the Fatimids from North Africa, Tunisia area, 1,000 years ago. So Egypt has had this over 1,000-year-old history, about 1,400 years actually, history of being a crossroads of Islam. It was brought by the original, the first generation of Muslims in 640 AD, in which Cairo itself, or Islam, was planted for the first time in Africa. And then it was the crossroads, the Abbasids and the Ayyubids and the Fatimids and the Ottomans, and so every time a new generation, a new dynasty, a different Islamic dynasty would come to Egypt, Egypt would tend to absorb those various traditions. So this is why I bring students to Egypt. I always say that Egypt is the best place, and will continue to be the best place for Americans, for Europeans, for anybody to come and understand the Islamic world through the eyes of an Arab, Sunni, Muslim city and country, because it really has aspects of all of these different Islamic traditions. So it'll take a while, however, because even Al-Azhar University remains one of the more conservative, and please don't equate conservatism with militancy. It is the home of the conservative political thinking, but they also are attempting to provide all of these other traditions as well. So, and combine that with the intellectual power of secular Egyptians, Christians, Muslims, secular, the former Jewish community, the tragic loss of the Jewish community that was also part of that secular tradition. Combine that with that. Let's see if that can ever be elements of it. It'll never be reconstituted as it was, but there are traditions there that hopefully will spring forth again.
Well, I want to thank our two guests. My Lowenthal. What a wonderful way to complete this semester's open classroom.
At home.
I think if we ever needed to ask the question, is demography important? Is demography desperate? Today wrapped that up in such graphic way. So thanks for joining us this semester. We look forward to seeing you and your friends come the fall. Have a great summer. Enjoy. We'll see you soon.